household charms. The magic you never think about is the magic you could never cast. The Burrow. Sometime before dawn. Molly Weasley stands in a kitchen that shouldn't work. 7 floors of architecture held together by enchantment and stubbornness. A flick of her wand, and knives begin dicing onions on their own. Another flick, and a mop scrubs the floor in perfect rhythm. The clock on the wall tracks 9 living souls across an entire country. Breakfast is cooking itself, and not a single spell has been spoken aloud. Most viewers remember this scene as comedy, a quirky little moment of magical domesticity. It is not. What Molly Weasley does every morning before her family wakes up is simultaneous non-verbal enchantment of multiple independent objects, each performing a different task, at a different speed, with a different purpose. In academic terms, that is parallel sustained animation. The Ministry's own internal training manual for the Auror Office, the document that governs combat readiness, lists parallel casting as a Level 4 proficiency. Most Aurors never reach it. Think about what a combat spell actually requires. Stupefy. 1 target, 1 direction, 1 effect. Expelliarmus. The same. Even Protego, the shield charm that saved lives in the Battle of Hogwarts, is a single sustained output in a single direction. Now think about what Molly does. She maintains 6 or 7 enchantments at once, each with independent movement, timing, and purpose, and she does it while holding a conversation about Percy's career choices. In medieval alchemical traditions, this kind of divided magical attention was called the Weaver's Mind, the ability to hold multiple threads of intention without dropping any. Alchemists considered it rarer than raw power. Here is what makes this unsettling. The Hogwarts curriculum never teaches household magic, not once. There is no charms class on how to enchant a broom to sweep on its own. No exam on animated dishwashing. Witches like Molly Weasley learn this the way Muggle parents learn to cook, through necessity, repetition, and years of invisible labor. The magic that runs the wizarding world was never considered important enough to teach formally. And yet, when the Battle of Hogwarts came, it was Molly Weasley who killed Bellatrix Lestrange. Not with some obscure curse, not with dark magic, with the same precision, speed, and absolute control she had practiced every single morning for 20 years. The most dangerous witch in the room was the one nobody had been watching. But household charms are only the foundation, the silent, invisible layer beneath everything. What happens when magic is designed not to help, but to annoy, trip, and humiliate? That is where jinxes come in, and the Ministry's rules around them are stranger than you think. Jinxes. The only category of magic the Ministry officially permits you to use on another human being. Picture the Hogwarts Dueling Club, 1992. Lockhart stands on the platform, cape freshly pressed, smile freshly rehearsed. Seconds later, Snape sends him flying across the Great Hall with a single spell. Students laugh. No one files a complaint. No one even flinches. Because what just happened was, by every legal definition in the wizarding world, perfectly acceptable. The Ministry of Magic classifies offensive spells into 3 tiers: jinxes, hexes, and curses. This hierarchy is not just academic, it is legal. And jinxes sit at the bottom, in a peculiar gray zone where magic designed to affect another person's body is not only tolerated, but actively encouraged as a teaching tool. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement's classification of spell severity, first standardized in 1629, defines a jinx as a spell whose effects are irritating but not permanently harmful, and which can be reversed by the caster or by moderate counter-magic. That single word, reversible, is what separates a jinx from a criminal offense. The Ministry presents this as a clean, rational system. But here is what the official guidelines quietly ignore. The line between irritating and harmful depends entirely on context. A Jellylegs jinx in a classroom is a joke. A Jellylegs jinx on a cliff edge is attempted murder. The spell is identical. The classification does not change. Only the coroner's report does. This mirrors a problem older than magic itself. Medieval English common law struggled with the same distinction. The difference between battery and horseplay often depended not on the act, but on whether someone got hurt. The wizarding legal system inherited that exact blind spot and never bothered to fix it. And so Hogwarts became, in effect, the largest jinx testing facility in Britain. Students jinx each other between classes with the casual regularity of passing notes. Madame Pomfrey's hospital wing logs show a reliable spike every October, right when second years learn their first knockback jinx and decide to practice it on friends during lunch. After the Battle of Hogwarts, the Ministry attempted to reclassify several common jinxes upward, but the effort collapsed under its own weight. Too many everyday spells lived in that gray zone. Restrict jinxes, and you effectively outlaw half of what children learn in defense against the dark arts before their OWLs. The proposal was shelved within a year, which raises a question no ministry official has ever answered publicly. If jinxes are harmless enough to be legal, why does the Hogwarts curriculum spend 5 years teaching students how to block them? But here is where it gets truly strange. The very thing that makes jinxes legal, their reversibility, is also what makes them invisible. A jinx leaves no lasting magical trace, no signature that lingers, which means there is no way to prove after the fact that one was ever cast at all. The safest spell on the books is also the one no court can ever catch. And if jinxes are already this difficult to regulate, imagine what happens one tier above, where hexes begin, and where the ministry's own legal definitions start to contradict themselves. Hexes. The Ministry of Magic spent over a century trying to define them, and never quite managed. Picture a cramped hearing room on level 2, sometime in the winter of 1971. A young witch sits before a panel of Wizengamot officials. She used a stinging hex on a man who followed her through Nocturne Alley. The man's face swelled shut for 3 days. The defense argues it was a hex, temporary, defensive, proportional. The prosecution argues the lasting tissue damage reclassifies it as a curse. Both sides cite the same ministry statute. Both are technically correct. This is the core problem with hexes, and it is entirely by design. The ministry's own decree for the reasonable classification of offensive magic, first drafted in 1839, defines a hex as a spell that causes moderate discomfort or impairment without lasting bodily alteration. A curse, by contrast, produces severe harm, persistent alteration, or irreversible effect. Sounds clean on paper. In practice, these categories collapse almost immediately. The Bat Bogey Hex, Ginny Weasley's signature, causes flying bogies to attack the victim's face. Unpleasant, certainly. But cast at full power by a skilled witch, it has been documented to obstruct airways. At what exact moment does moderate discomfort become severe harm? The statute does not say. It was never meant to. Internal reviews from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement reveal that classification disputes account for nearly a quarter of all delayed prosecutions in spell-related assault cases. Not because the law is broken, but because it was built on a distinction that does not exist in magic itself. Medieval magical scholars understood this perfectly well. The Latin grimoire traditions did not separate hexes from curses at all. They used a single term, maleficium, and judged severity only by outcome. The modern 3-tier system was a 19th century British invention, imported from Muggle legal theory about degrees of bodily harm. Magic, of course, does not care about Muggle legal theory. Severus Snape invented Sectum Sempra and scrawled it into a textbook margin labeled "For Enemies." Was it a hex or a curse? When Harry used it on Draco Malfoy, Snape healed the wounds in seconds. Had Snape not been there, Malfoy would have bled to death on a bathroom floor. The same spell, the same wand movement, the same incantation. Its legal classification depends entirely on whether someone competent happened to be standing nearby. Wine. And here is where the system truly fractures. A witch who casts a hex that accidentally causes lasting damage can be prosecuted for cursing. But a witch who casts a curse that a healer happens to reverse quickly can argue it was only a hex. The law does not classify the spell. It classifies the luck of the aftermath. Ask any Auror who has filled out a spell incident report, and they will tell you the same quiet truth. The line between hex and curse is not drawn by magic, by intent, or by law. It is drawn by whoever writes the report first. But if hexes already sit in this legal shadow, technically regulated, practically unjudgeable, then curses should be the clear boundary, the place where the law finally holds firm. You would think so. Except the ministry allows some of them to be cast on 14-year-olds in a classroom. Curses. The word itself carries weight that no textbook definition can soften. September 1994. Defense against the dark arts classroom, 4th floor. Professor Moody, or rather, the man everyone believed was Moody, sets a spider on his desk. The room smells of old wood and something faintly chemical. He raises his wand, speaks 2 words, and the spider begins to dance against its own will. 14-year-old Neville Longbottom watches from the 2nd row, gripping the edge of his desk until his knuckles go white. No one stops the lesson. Here is what most people miss about that day. The Ministry of Magic approved it, not Barty Crouch Jr., the actual ministry. Internal memoranda from the Department of Magical Education, drafted in the summer of 1994, explicitly expanded the 4th-year defense curriculum to include practical demonstration of classified offensive magic, including but not limited to curses of the unforgivable category. The authorization passed through the office of Bartemius Crouch Sr. The man who sentenced his own son to Azkaban greenlit a syllabus that his son, secretly free, would use to traumatize children in a castle. The irony is surgical. But the deeper question cuts further. Curses occupy a legal space no other spell category does. A hex can be ambiguous. A jinx can be trivial. A curse, from the Latin cursus, a course set in motion, implies something that persists beyond the moment of casting. Medieval magical theorists across Europe drew the line precisely here. A curse carries the caster's will after the wand is lowered. It follows. It remembers. The Hogwarts Library catalogs over 200 named curses. Only 3 hold the unforgivable classification. The official reason is that Imperius, Cruciatus, and Avada Kedavra each violate a fundamental axis of personhood: will, body, life. Clean. Elegant. But ministry reclassification records tell a messier story. The entrail-expelling curse carried a life sentence in 1672. By 1903, it appeared as a 6th-year practical exam option. The curse did not change. The politics did. Dumbledore did not protest when the expanded curriculum reached his desk, not out of indifference to children watching spiders writhe. He understood something the ministry consistently failed to grasp. Ignorance of dark magic had never once protected anyone from it. Voldemort did not recruit students who understood curses. He recruited students who feared them without comprehension. The void where knowledge should have been, that was always the real weapon. And yet here is where the whole system turns strange. The same ministry that authorized 14-year-olds to witness the killing curse never once required those students to learn how to block one. A government that trusted children to see death, but not to raise a shield against it. Which leads to a question the 4th-year curriculum never answers, but the 5th level of magic does. What happens when an entire generation of wizards grows up never learning to defend themselves? Counter spells. The branch of magic that separates those who survive a duel from those who simply lose one. Winter of 1995. The Room of Requirement. Harry Potter stands before 25 students and asks them to cast Protego, a basic shield charm, second nature for any competent wizard. Half the room produces nothing. The other half manages a flicker that wouldn't stop a well-aimed dung bomb. These aren't first years. Some of them can already conjure a corporeal Patronus. And here's what most people miss. This wasn't a student problem. It was a systemic one. The Half-Blood Prince's copy of Advanced Potion Making is filled with marginal notes on hexes, curses, and offensive innovations. Sectum Sempra, Levicorpus, Langlock, Muffliato. Not a single annotation on shielding. Snape, one of the most gifted duelists of his generation, apparently never considered defense worth the ink. That tells you something about how the wizarding world prioritizes its magic. In 1996, Fred and George Weasley began selling shield hats, shield cloaks, and shield gloves from their joke shop in Diagon Alley. Novelty items, party gags. Within months, the Ministry of Magic placed a bulk order, not for amusement, but because their own employees could not reliably cast shield charms. A government responsible for regulating all magic in Britain had to outsource basic protective enchantments to two 20-year-olds who never finished school. Internal procurement filings from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement categorized the purchases as supplementary protective equipment, as though the problem were a supply shortage rather than a catastrophic skills gap across an entire generation. Consider the parallel. In medieval Europe, a knight learned his shield before his sword. Defense preceded offense, because survival preceded victory. The wizarding world inverted this entirely. Hogwarts teaches Stupefy before Protego. The curriculum assumes students will attack before they ever need to block. Centuries of magical education built around the quiet assumption that the best defense is simply not needing one. This is why Dumbledore's army mattered far more than most people realize. Harry wasn't teaching rebellion. He was filling a gap that 5 years of institutional education and the entire ministry infrastructure had failed to close: the ability to not die when someone points a wand at you. But here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Protego is level 5. A mid-tier charm. Not advanced, not obscure, not forbidden. If most adult wizards struggle with something in the middle of the scale, it means the average magical citizen walks through life functionally defenseless against anything above it, and most dark curses are above it. The wizarding world didn't fall to Voldemort because he was impossibly strong. It fell because almost no one had ever been taught to stand. And what waits at level 6 is the reason shields alone were never going to be enough. Magic so volatile it answers to no one, not even the wizard who conjures it. Fiend Fire, the curse that burns its creator just as eagerly as its target. Fiend Fire, the only spell in the wizarding world that doesn't care who cast it. The Room of Requirement, May 1998. Vincent Crabbe raises his wand, speaks an incantation he barely understands, and the air catches fire. Not ordinary fire, living fire. Serpents of flame coil across mountains of forgotten objects. Chimeras made of heat and hatred claw through centuries of Hogwarts secrets. Within seconds, Crabbe realizes what every dark wizard before him learned too late. Fiendfire doesn't obey. Most curses maintain a relationship with their caster. You aim, you direct, you control. Fiendfire breaks that contract entirely. The moment it leaves the wand, it becomes its own entity, a predator with no loyalty. Department of Mysteries records from the early 1800s document 17 incidents where trained curse breakers attempted controlled fiendfire deployment. 14 died, not from enemy action, from their own spell. The Ministry classified fiendfire as a Class 5 self-propagating curse, the only spell to share a danger rating with living creatures like dragons and Nundu. And there's a reason for that classification. Fiendfire doesn't just burn, it feeds. Every object it consumes makes it larger, hotter, hungrier. It takes the shapes of magical beasts not as decoration, but because on some fundamental level, cursed fire becomes a beast. Medieval alchemists called uncontrollable flame ignis innaturalis, fire that devoured the philosopher's laboratory from within. Fiend fire is that nightmare made literal. And here's what people miss about the Battle of Hogwarts. Crabbe, a student who could barely manage basic spell work, somehow knew how to cast one of the most dangerous curses in existence. Someone taught him. Amicus Caro spent an entire year teaching dark arts to children. Not defense against, just dark arts. Fiend fire in the room of requirement wasn't an accident. It was a curriculum outcome. The darkest irony? Crabbe's uncontrollable fire accomplished what Dumbledore's carefully planned mission required. It destroyed a Horcrux. The Ravenclaw diadem, an artifact that survived 1,000 years, was erased by a boy who didn't even know what he was burning. Voldemort hid fragments of his soul in the most protected places imaginable. One of them was undone by friendly fire from his own side. But if fiend fire destroys Horcruxes, and a 17-year-old can cast it, why wasn't it the answer all along? Because the cost is the answer. You don't use fiend fire because you probably won't survive it. The spell that destroys everything destroys the hand that wields it first. And that is the ceiling of dark magic before the final threshold. Spells that burn, shatter, consume, all still leave room for survival, for reversal, for mercy. At level 7, mercy is no longer part of the equation. The unforgivable curses weren't banned until 1717, which raises a question no one at the Ministry wants to answer. What exactly was legal before that? The unforgivable curses. They weren't always unforgivable, and that's the part the Ministry would rather you forget. Britain, 1716. A wizard stands on a rooftop above the Thames, wand raised, and speaks 2 words. A body falls into the dark water. No auror arrives. No warrant is issued, because as of that evening, nothing illegal has happened. For centuries, the Imperius, Cruciatus, and Killing curses were simply spells. Powerful, feared, but not forbidden. The International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy took effect in 1692. The unforgivable classification didn't arrive until 1717. That's 25 years of hidden magical society, with no legal limit on the darkest magic a wand could produce. Early Wizengamot records reference something called the permitted lethality doctrine, the principle that a wizard's right to wield their full magical ability could not be curtailed by statute. The Killing curse wasn't classified as murder. It was classified as magic, and magic, by ancient tradition, answered to no court. The parallel to the real world is uncomfortably precise. Europe had no unified concept of war crimes until centuries of atrocity forced the conversation. The magical world followed the same arc, except their weapons left no wounds to document. So what changed? The official record says the Wizengamot acted on moral principle. The reality was less poetic. A string of Imperius-controlled officials nearly collapsed the ministry from within. The Cruciatus had become standard interrogation practice across Europe, and the Killing curse was quietly settling inheritance disputes among old families. No blood, no blade, no trace. The ban wasn't born from enlightenment. It was born from the ruling class, realizing these curses could be pointed at them. Here's the detail no one dwells on. The punishment after 1717 was life in Azkaban. But before 1717, wizards who cast the very same curses died titled, respected, and comfortable. History didn't condemn them. It simply moved the line and pretended it had always been there. But here's what truly unsettles. Bartemius Crouch Sr. authorized unforgivable curses against suspected Death Eaters during the First Wizarding War. The Ministry loosened restrictions again during the Second. Each time civilization felt threatened enough, the word unforgivable started to bend. If the line has moved before, in both directions, what guarantees it won't move again? The darkest spells in the wizarding world were never truly unforgivable. They were only unforgivable when the wrong people cast them. 7 levels, from the simplest charm to the killing word. If this list proves anything, it's that magic was never innocent. It was only ever as good, or as terrible, as the person holding the wand. You know what genuinely surprises me about all of this? Not that the darkest spells exist. Not that the ministry can barely regulate half of them. It is that every competent witch and wizard carries all 7 levels inside them at once. Molly Weasley spent years enchanting dishes to wash themselves. Then, one evening, the same hands that had stirred 1,000 family dinners killed Bellatrix Lestrange on the spot. No one trained her for that moment. She simply knew, because you cannot master the gentle end of magic without understanding where the violent end begins. And that is the part no one talks about. Not the power, the silence. Every ordinary wizard wakes up knowing the full range of what their wand can do, from a warming charm to something that could end a life, and simply chooses not to. No one applauds that, no one notices, but that quiet, daily discipline is the only real thing standing between their world and complete collapse. So here is what I want you to think about. Pick one character, any character, who never cast an unforgivable curse across all 7 books. Now ask yourself honestly, was it because they could not, or because they chose not to every single day? Drop your answer below. I am genuinely curious who you picked. If this kind of conversation is what you are here for, subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Because the next lesson is about something most fans have seen hundreds of times and somehow still never actually noticed. I will see you then. Take care of yourselves.